Doing this one sitting down for some reason. I'm gonna get into it really quick because I have a very long interview chat with Hayden Pedigo this week. Hayden is a very old friend, as you'll find out, because ages ago when he was 18 and yeah, when he was 18, he contacted me for the first time, and eventually we ended up working together on his kind of his debut long player, uh, five steps. Um, and It's 10 years now since it's been out, and he's having quite a moment right now with his own motor trilogy wrapping up on Mexican Summer. He had a great live album last year. He has an incredible album coming out with Chat Pile, of all things. Uh, he is producing a new record by somebody that he's really proud of. He's just working on all sorts of stuff. We've had this really interesting relationship, and I wish I'd been better about keeping up with him, but I've always been watching him from afar. I somehow still have never met the guy in real life because for a long time he didn't tour, and then when he did come out here, I continuously wasn't able to meet with him. I was really sick last time. Um, it was a really refreshing conversation. It felt like he was kind of an open book about an era that he doesn't talk as much about, but maybe he does. But it felt like a very casual, open conversation about, especially about that era, and then how that era impacted other things we go into. Sort of, I think in a way, this is a good perspective of somebody who's been very small, um, but now has things like a PR person working for him. He's done the grind. I don't think I've ever met anybody who grinded harder in terms of trying to get attention and press and all these things for himself. He's got a very interesting idea of the way he phrases, like how he talks to artists about how to be an artist around having a conceptualization of who you are. It's a really good conversation. You should check out the whole thing. So yeah, let's get to my conversation with Hayden right now. All right, so I'm here with Hayden Pedigo. Um, did I tell you? I got to do this real fast. Have I told you that I, for way too long, was like adamant that your name was Hayden Pedigo to people, like when we first were working together? Have I ever told you that? I
No, a
probably
lot
would
of
have
people
been.
that's how my last name's pronounced, so it's understandable.
Okay, but I don't think I think at the time I would have been too embarrassed to tell you, but like now, now it's it's been long enough. Uh,
Yeah.
I remember having like a fight with my wife about it, being like, "No, I'm pretty sure," and she's like, "You could just ask him." I was like, "Nah."
Well, I'm not gonna.
Anyways, it's good to see you. It's if people don't know, uh, well, I mean, I feel like I'll probably introduce you in general in the intro to this, but people probably know you if they've been watching this. Um, and we'll talk about that you're having kind of a nice moment right now with the new record. But if people don't know the relationship between us, 10 years ago this October, I believe, uh, we released basically your debut full album, I think, Five Steps, and we wanted to talk about the wildness of like everything that's happened since then for you and how kind of interesting that record, reflect on that record. And and yeah, we thought it would be fun to talk about because there's a lot about that record that is, I think, forgotten. And I was just listening to it again, and it brings up a lot of thoughts and feelings. So I'm happy you wanted to come on and talk about it. But first, what's an interesting contrast to that is that you have a new project out right now that is getting quite a lot of acclaim and really people are very excited about. So uh, I mean, we don't need to do the stupid normal interview subject, but like, just how's it been? How's it going? Like, how's that feeling? How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Yeah, it's exciting. It's also weird, like you said. It's 10 years, 10 years after that record, Five Steps. So it's a pretty cool feeling. Sometimes I'm surprised I'm still doing music, where I'm like, whoa, it's cool that I'm still
Yes.
doing this thing. It's changed so much, but it's also the same thing I was doing back then in a lot of ways. So I mean, it feels good. It's cool.
Yeah, totally. You were just doing tons, you were jumping around. doing a lot of different stuff right around release. And you also have, we should give you a moment to talk about this other project that you're really excited about right now. You were talking about a record you produced or co-produced.
Yeah, yeah, that one's really cool. It's by this guy named Jens Karas. It's a record called Crooked Songs coming out on the label Woodsist, which I love that label. But it's, I don't know, it's this really haunting singer-songwriter piano record. It's just a guy alone in an echoey room on a Wurlitzer singing with like some synths in the background. And yeah, that was a really wild, wild album. Yeah, the co-producing of it was over the past year and a half. So there's been a lot of stuff going on at once because I had my own record, I'll Be Waiting As You Drive Away, this Jen's Cross record, and then a collaborative album with this band Chat Pile, all within the same 12 months, which was it was a pretty wild time.
When did the live album come out? How
That
long
came
ago was
out,
that?
yeah, that was like September of 24, so that was also in the
Yeah,
same, all of that stuff was done in the same 12 months, which is
yeah,
wild,
that's
like
a crazy
released,
12,
recorded.
12 months, man. Uh, yeah, so I did check out that first song. It sounded really good. I encourage people to check it out. I'll link it in this, all the stuff that we're talking about here. Um, so yeah, I was just listening to Five Steps again. I want to hear your reflections on that album, but the one like stupid surface thing, it's not stupid, but the surface thing that like just hit me like a ton of bricks was like, that album still sounds phenomenal. How in the world at like 19 with like digital, you were working with all these people, we could kind of tell the story of this album, but like, it's kind of amazing how well it stands up. I was listening to your new stuff and, which is pristine and everything. I mean, Scott Colburn mastered it, but like, what in the world? Have you reflected on that recently? Have you noticed how great that those songs sound?
It's weird because that record, the Five Steps record, is kind of strange for me because for me personally, I think it sounds, sometimes I think it sounds really bad, but that's only because I know what I was using to make that record, and it was just GarageBand. That was it. And I
Yeah.
remember my friend had a little like Zoom handheld recorder and a microphone that you could plug into the Zoom. And we did that entire record basically in my apartment. We've just set up a microphone in the living room. And then all the collaborative stuff, it's like, you know this, but some people might not know, but it's like we had like Charles Hayward of This Heat was on the album, Fred Frith of Henry Cow was on the album. No, you had like Zappy, the drummer of Faust, was on the album. There was just so many, and then that's not even including the guitar side of things, which it's like Danny Polgardi was on the record, Chuck Johnson. There was just a lot of people, and that was all through Facebook. I was talking to someone the other day that was kind of the golden age of Facebook when Facebook was still kind of fun.
Yeah, totally. In fact, when I was looking through our correspondence, I was like, I remember messages, these very specific messages, and I couldn't find them. And I realized we were just jamming on Facebook the whole time. That was how when I'd get these like little drops from you, and like I'm doing this, and I'm like, what? Like, are you sure? Like, but the final result of this album for anybody who hasn't gone and listened to it is it's your debut. Again, you had a EP tape beforehand, so it wasn't completely your debut, but um, I have something funny to reflect on that. Uh, and but you had these guitar songs, but then you're like, I want to do more, and you were just kind of, it's a thing we can talk about. You were kind of fearless, and you just sort of said, I'm going to contact a bunch of people about working with them, and a shocking amount of people said yes to the point that you were doubling them up on certain tracks, and obviously that whole back, so it's split into two sides, and the front side's mostly guitar pieces duetting with guitar players for the most part, and then the backside's this whole host of sort of older folks for the most part in the ambient or interesting art rock or whatever world, and it's like tape loops and synths and all these sort of you know field recordings and stuff, and it was always a very interesting structure that I always wondered about, like, did that do us do us well or poorly, like I love it, but it was also like so stark, you know what I mean, between the two. But it was incredible because I mean, there's like one track without somebody else on it, I think. Maybe a digital only or something. it's all flooding back right now. But basically, every track has a known uh, collaborator on it, and you just went out and I think, we've never had this conversation, but I think the fact that you were able to just pop up with some good stuff and say, "Hey, I'm 19" or "I'm 18," really,
Yeah.
that was the other thing for people's context is you were incredibly young. Um, and that was such a hook of like, why is this 19, like with me too, it's like, wow, this kid who's pretty dang good, was just contacting me out of the blue with this like level of confidence, this sort of like wild level of confidence that you're just like, I don't know, man, if you could pull it off, yeah, let's do it, and yeah, I mean, like reflecting on that, like it's just wild that you had that many collaborators on it. Like it's crazy to look at that list again.
Yeah. It's a weird record because, like you said, I feel like not a ton of people know about it at this point, and I think part of it was because it was so early on. I had kind of come out of nowhere with this record, so I think a lot of people, the people that knew about it, were kind of like, "How did this happen exactly?" And I mean, even the way that record happened is far before that. I had reached out to you
Yeah.
because Daniel Bachman actually told me about you, and he said I should try to release with you. I had emailed you or messaged you and asked if you'd put out my first tape, and you told me, go put out this tape and then come back to me later when you have an album or something like that. So I
Yeah.
went I made my first kind of album. It was a tape, but I made it like in 2 months on GarageBand. I released it on a small tape label, and then I went back to you um, before I'd even finished this record. And I asked if you would put out my album, and that's how it happened. So I mean, it was just I was messaging people all the time, and it's like it's weird because in some ways my confidence now feels like not stupidity, but I was kind of like maybe too dumb to know that I wasn't very good, but I was just excited about music. And I think that's how the collaborators ended up happening is people saw that I was pretty stoked about music. And I think they read that my intentions were pretty honest. I wasn't like, the record was not some clout thing. It was like this album I was really excited about. And um, it sounds kind of amateurish to me now, but there's also a charm in that I think it's like there's certain things on it I did that I'm embarrassed by, but all of it was recorded when I was 18 and 19. Like I hadn't even turned
Yeah.
20
I
yet
mean,
by the time that album was completed. And I remember at one point the record got really out of hand because I remember I kept going to you saying I got a new
yeah.
collaborator, and I could tell you were kind of like, okay, okay. And then finally I told you I'm gonna reach out to Steven Stapleton of Nurse with Wound and ask him if he'll mix it. And you told me like stop, like we're done, we
Oh,
can't.
I did. I
And I remember that was your
remember this.
you're like you cannot ask Nurse with Wound to mix the record. So luckily that's when I stopped, is you told me to stop.
Wow. That's awesome. I see there was a bunch of these are all the Facebook messages. Cause I remember like a whole thing with traveling and Tangerine Dream maybe popping up for a second. Was it Tangerine Dream? It was somebody. And I was just like,
I did,
really?
yeah. I did email Edgar from Tangerine Dream,
Yeah.
and he did respond to me saying like, "I'm busy right now." And what's funny is I think he had just been doing score work for GTA 5, which was really
Yeah.
wild. And he was like, "I can't do it right now, but maybe later." And then he passed shortly after that. So I remember being really bummed. That was like, wow,
That's
I
right.
nearly worked with Edgar from Tangerine Dream, but it just didn't line up.
Yeah.
But that was a
You're,
unique time of like Facebook and blogs and so many things. Like that
yeah.
album only happened, I think, in 2014. That's the only time it could have happened.
Yeah. It's really that. I always call it shorthanded, the tiny mixtapes era, right? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
and uh one step after the blogspot era, but before everything went nuts. And
Yeah.
uh but like yeah, you're really jogging my memory on this. Like you came to me with a bunch of tracks and I was like, these are very good. I like them. They fit into what I want to do. I've obviously been continuing to go in that direction with part of the label. And you're like, I think I want to get a few people to collaborate on it. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I love, you dropped a couple names. I'm like, I love those people. I'd love to have them on the label. You know what I mean? And it just kept going. You just were like, I also did this. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I also did this. And then when the names for like the older, experimental art rock guys started coming in, I literally had a couple moments where I talked to my wife and I was like, and my like person who was helping me, this woman named Rachel. I literally had to talk to them and be like, do I have to figure out whether or not this guy is like, am I being catfish? Like, is it because it's such a wild thing? Like
Yeah.
some of these names that you're saying, and it was just happening, and they were like coming. The tracks were coming back really fast, and I'm like,
Yeah.
no, you didn't get Zapp. I mean, Zappy's a very friendly, open guy, but like some of those people, I was like, no, you didn't get them. What are you talking about? And I was just trying to be like, yeah, man, good. Like you're just so ahead of me in terms of like, a lot of the dialogue on this thing is me being like, hey, in person, I'm pretty good at being loud and excited about the music on the label, but like, I don't love a lot of the overhead, and I'm not good at the press side. And then like, I'm always not like kind of sheepishly like, hey, whoever writer, do you want to maybe look at? And you were just like crashing people, crashing through Facebook and being like, "Hey, look, pay attention to me," and I was always like, you can get away with this for so long, man, but like you may as well use it now. You know what I mean? Like I think you're right that there was like a naivety there that was to your benefit. You know what I mean? Like it was helping you. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I just was like, no, no. I probably was mostly like, I can't afford that, but like, uh,
I think you were just getting overwhelmed and you were like, we need to get this album out. Because otherwise it would have been like a 3 year long project. But it's funny that you brought up the catfishing element.
yeah,
Because I
yeah,
remember I had a couple points where I even freaked out with certain people when you're like, wait, am I getting catfish? But then I realized like the chain of events that led to certain features were like, I befriended Charles Hayward of This Heat's daughter, Merlin, and we would talk
mm,
over Skype, and it was actually his daughter, and that's how he got on the record. And then I asked them to connect with Fred Frith, and he obviously knew Fred Frith, so we got
yeah,
connected over email. And then through Fred Frith, that's how Zappy from Faust came in. I was like, okay, I'm not getting catfish because there's like certifiably these people are making the connections. It's not
yeah,
like I think I freaked out like what if it was like a bogus Facebook account or something like that. And I remember there was like so many funny things that happened, like getting like I don't want to butcher his name, but the guitarist from Acid Mother's Temple on the
oh yeah,
record, and he was. I remember asking him, and he was like, "Well, I record on like DAT cassette or something." It was like the
that's
weirdest. He was like, "I
right.
don't know how to do this," and I was like, "Okay." And he got it. He got the parts to me, but it was like the weirdest way he was recording that did not translate well to the internet. But then he ultimately got the guitar parts to me. And it's just like I was doing so much dumb stuff. Like a lot of the experimental pieces where like my friend would drive me out to the airport and I'd be dangling an amp in a stairwell in the parking garage. Like that night I'd be like, I have to finish this song, drive me out to the airport. And we're just making a bunch of noise, going home, throwing it in GarageBand. It was like, song done, sending it to you. So I mean that was like happened so many times. Like even my first cassette that I released wasn't mastered, I don't think. Like I don't think I mastered music. I just like put it out. But you obviously knew that Five Steps had to be mastered, which was good.
Yeah,
Um
I mean,
but I mean
and we got
it's
Scott Colburn to master, which was awesome. I was just remembering that he did a
yeah.
great job. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean there was
another
so
great
many
name. Yeah,
and it's weird how I feel like it's like a full circle moment 10 years later. It's like the other day I was in New York playing a show like 2 weeks ago, and this writer, Alex Frank, came to the show. And it's like he's the guy that wrote about me in this album in Vogue in 2014. And I was like, how weird is it that this writer, like, we were talking about this record at the show 10 years later, over 10 years later. And it's cool that it's like I still know some of these people who covered it way back. And the way, like, I always tell the story is the way the Vogue, like, Vogue covering this little record happened because I got you might remember this, but I got a fader piece because I
yeah.
messaged the like deputy like head editor of the fader on Facebook, was like, would you cover my album? And he did. Like, this is the head
And they
editor of the,
did.
and
This
they
was the
did.
thing. You kept getting stuff by just like again crashing through the Facebook screen and just being like, "Hey," it was just
Exactly. And what's funny is through him, he wrote about it. And then Alex Frank used to write for the fader. Duncan Cooper at the fader sent it to him. he had just been given the music, like a new music department at Vogue. Like they wanted him to have like, they're like, hey, Vogue wants to cover music. Can you write about stuff? So there's a little window where Vogue, like that arm of the website was so young that they didn't care what he was covering. And
Yeah, yeah,
within a year, I remember Vogue suddenly was like covering Taylor Swift and stuff like that. It was no longer like all of that stuff was gone.
yeah,
But I mean, this leads to the thing of my method of reaching out to writers over Facebook. I remember 2016 or 17, it suddenly stopped. Like that no longer worked. You would either get no's or get completely ignored. And I remember wondering, like, what happened? Like, what went wrong post 2016 in terms of music coverage? Like, it wasn't enough to just be confident. And I'm ranting a little bit, but
yeah.
someone
No,
told
this
me
is interesting.
it was Facebook made the switch deciding that video content was like the king and articles and links no longer mattered anymore. So it's like a lot of writers suddenly like they couldn't cover things they used to with that kind of freedom. And I would see, Vice would have the electronic music arm Thump, like that was a part
Hmm.
of Vice. There, Vice was cutting Thump, and all of these outlets were getting canned in the wake of like Facebook deciding video format was king. So I think that could be why that kind of press vanished.
There was just a huge contraction for sure in that era. We lost Tiny Mixtapes a couple of, years later. We lost a lot of those sort of more underground things, and so there's less of that ladder up. I think there's a sort of thing you do where you slowly ladder up to better and better press. You just jumped a bunch of steps, but most people ladder up, and then for sure that it's very well documented that like Facebook, the pivot to video period, and then Google following the pivot to video in terms of their linking structure, valuing video more, just crushed everybody and made them all hire video people and fire writers and things like that. But the craziest thing about that, I don't know if you ever heard this, is all of the numbers from Facebook were completely made up. Like they were juicing those numbers like crazy. So not only did it like crush whole journalism and industries and stuff, but all of that was fake. There wasn't value. This huge number of discrepancy that they would get impressions wise for posts versus video posts were just made up. Facebook was
Yeah.
just totally fine with making it up, which is just, meta, and it's just so reprehensible in that way. They're just so okay with that stuff. But yeah, I agree that that's something. Do you think that it had to do with like suddenly you didn't have the story of like, I'm a nobody who's going to have a first record with all these people? Like, did you feel like the second time around it was harder, like in that way of like, don't take this wrong, but like, there's that classic thing of like everybody in your life will come to your band's first two shows, but your 10th show's really hard. You know what I mean? Like that writ large. Do you feel like that ever? I always wondered, like, did you feel that strongly, or do you felt like it was more market forces?
Well, I don't know. I mean, what's the way I like if I had to map it out is I kind of had a really warped view of music and press because I was so lucky that all these things came together that I got press kind of immediately. And I was kind of aware that it's like, you shouldn't get too comfortable with this. This might not last forever. But in a weird way, it was kind of a slight curse to start off on that foot thinking this was normal. And I mean, the record I put out after that one called Greetings from Amarillo actually did get some decent press. I mean, I had Terry Allen on that record. It didn't have the amount of guest features, but that thing kind of helped. But then finally, I made a record after that one that honestly was an awful record. It was a really bad record. I say that as a person who made it. I made a bad record. And suddenly there was like, I remember with that record, there was no coverage. No one bought it. No one wrote about it. And I remember it being kind of devastating. Like, what
Yeah,
happened? Why are people not stoked about this? But it ended up being like now I can look back on it as being like one of the most vital moments for me that needed to happen. I needed to be knocked down a bit, and it was just a total recalibration at that point where I realized like no one's gonna cover you if you make a bad record. Like that's just the harsh truth is sometimes there are great records that don't get covered. I know that for
for
sure
sure.
happened. But there's sometimes there's bad records that get a lot of coverage, but if you make a bad record, there's a high chance no one will want to write about it. So it was definitely a learning lesson for me. But this leads into the next stage of when I signed with Mexican Summer. They used a publicist. Like they would hire a publicist to do press. And I remember one of the first things the first publicist I worked with at Mexican Summer told me was, "Hey, you can't be going rogue, like pitching PR for yourself. That's what we're here for." And she was right. Like I couldn't, I would only be hurting things. But I remember there was this deep sadness that I couldn't pitch press anymore. It was like that was half of the fun for me was I really liked sending those emails and pitching myself, and like overnight that was done. I could no longer it was great because they probably did a better job at it, and um that was awesome, but it was kind of sad. I couldn't do that anymore.
I wonder how does, and if this is too too much of a psychological examination, just tell me. But like, I wonder, like, how do the sort of your other forays into stuff and becoming like kind of a personality outside of your music, when does that line up with these records? Because I'm trying to remember, because was some of that like you trying to recreate the feelings that you were getting in the first record, or was that completely, did you feel like it was completely I think you are you know what I mean? Like, so I don't think it's like, I don't think everything is caused by some trauma or whatever, but like, was there any feeling about that, or is my timeline wrong? And from everything from the videos you were doing to the actual like Kid Candidate stuff to, um, I don't know, you were like very excited about like the role you kind of got on when you were doing kind of comedic and absurdist stuff. And I was sitting on the sideline really excited because I was like, yeah, when you said earlier, like, sorry, I'm saying like eight things at the same time, but like when you said earlier, you were interested that you were still doing music 10 years later. I was actually interested about what your career was going to be because you had all these talents and you were so good at just being you. You know what I mean? And I think you figured out how to be, you will continue to be you in a lot of different ways, but I think you've kind of figured out, oh, I can do all these things. You know what I mean? But I was always very curious about like, um, where did it come from? And also, does it line up with some of those feelings now that you're saying that? Sorry, I'll stop talking and let you answer one of my seven questions.
No, I think you are very correct. I think my pivot into trying to be funny on the internet or running for city council, I think specifically the being funny on
Yeah,
the internet thing, I do think was a direct response to wanting to continue getting attention. I'm never going to lie and say I was doing it not to get attention, because very much a lot of the things I was doing was getting attention. My city council run was started by a joke video that was meant to provoke in my hometown. And I think it was a direct response. And then, you know, I, uh, I was doing press when I was running for city council. When I was actually running for office, I didn't have a campaign team. So I remember sending emails to like Rolling Stone asking, would y'all consider covering this story? Um, I think a lot of that though is, this is the thing I talk about a lot with artists and musicians, is a lot of the key to my successes in life is knowing how to maybe properly conceptualize myself, which is making a story with everything you do.
yeah,
And I think I noticed a lot of results from doing that. But it's talking with a lot of other artists and musicians, is there's this feeling that a lot of people don't like to conceptualize themselves because they feel like it's arrogant to conceptualize yourself in a certain way. And there's some truth to that. I think you have to obviously have some amount of ego if you're conceptualizing yourself and writing mythology or whatever. But I think all of that was connected because I feel like I did music until 2017. And then in 2018, 19, I ran for city council. And that was a very chaotic time in my life. There was a documentary about it. Then I started doing goofy photos and things like that on Instagram.
mhm,
But the breaking point for me was in 2020. I was living in Lubbock, Texas, was working at a bank, sitting in a cubicle. And one day I was just sitting in the cubicle and thought to myself, like, man, you're not doing anything. You haven't written any music in like 2 years. I hadn't written a single song. And I was like, and you're sitting in a cubicle. Like, this is not remotely what you thought you were going to be doing. And I think I snapped, I quit my job, and I went home and wrote a record. And I was like, I'm gonna write a record and try to make something really good. And that record was called Letting Go. That's the album that got me on Mexican Summer, and that started a new shift in my life. So I mean, I don't know. It's hard to look back on it now and understand exactly how I got to this point 10 years later, but I think a lot of it is um, just reaching for things beyond what seemed possible at the time, maybe.
At the time, during some of those periods, would you have been this aware that that's what you were doing? Or did you always feel like you kind of knew you were doing that? Or is that sort of an awareness that is set in through all these kind of these jumping around and success and failures and stuff? Or did you kind of always know, like, oh, this is sort of a formula that I'm developing about how to be myself publicly?
Yes. No, I think I was always somewhat aware, but now that I'm older, I mean, Five Steps came out when I was 19 or 20, and I'm 31 now. So now I've had time to think on it quite a bit. And I mean, I think I was just having fun. I do think it was just a
Hmm.
lot of fun, but I think too, because I lived in Amarillo, I had no scene. I just felt like I was stuck on an island. I was very desperate for attention because I felt like the chances of getting it were so slim. And it's funny, like I talk to guys now like Daniel Bachman, who we still keep up with each other. But I remember at the time, I would have been 19, he would have been like 22 or 3. And I remember being so jealous of him at the time because he was a great guitar player. He was getting a ton of attention and he was kind of plugged into a scene. Like he was in Virginia, but he was very tied into the post Jack Rose Philadelphia world. And I was envious of people that had scenes, like they had scenes they were associated with. And I had no scene, I had nothing to tie myself to. So I felt like I was really desperate to get attention because I felt like I didn't have I don't know. I don't want to say anything going for me, but I didn't have anything to tie myself to. It was just kind of
It wasn't a
like,
lot intrinsic. You had to make it. You know what I mean? Like,
yes, I had to
I,
make up a story.
yeah, that's interesting. I think that's very valid. And I actually do remember some conversations about that. And actually, that leads into something in terms of evolution. I mean, we could probably talk more about the press thing a little bit, but just as a quick side jog here, when we were having those conversations, I was like, well, one thing Daniel does is he was a dog at the time, you know what I mean? And I was producing a lot of shows. I had a festival and like I was, trying to get you out and I could kind of tell, but I think you've become a lot more open about it that like you were just pretty terrified about leaving home and playing live. Those two things I think
Yeah.
both were pretty big ideas for you for a person who is so big in how you present yourself. I think it was to make it that more real. You've talked quite a lot about this, but it's really interesting to see if we're talking about marking 10 years, you've become a wonderful performer. I mean, your live album is wonderful, and I've watched a lot of videos and all these things, and you've talked about it that there's a marked difference, and I wonder, I don't know, I mean, we don't have to dig too far into that, but I think that was also probably falls into this whole thing, as from my perspective of like, well, I'm not going to do that, so I have to do this other stuff. You know what I mean? Like that's not going to be available to me, right? Like I think that was also part of that story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I was scared of playing live. Like I had really bad nerves about live performance. And I thought touring was just impossible. I didn't believe in myself enough to tour or travel or do things like that. And at the time, I remember thinking, there was a lot of people that I think thought that I was blowing it by not touring, and I might have been, but I'm in hindsight, I'm really glad I didn't tour because I wasn't a strong enough guitar player yet. And I know you can improve your playing a lot by touring, which I've done now, but the timing just didn't feel right for me. And I remember it was weird how we released the Five Steps record and there was no album release show, there was no touring, there was nothing around it.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of people were surprised by that, that there was just nothing, there was nothing live for that
Yeah.
record.
And now that's so much more common because it's so impossible to do any of these things. You know what I mean? Like, especially in bigger cities, right? All these spaces are going away. And, if you're not in like New York or certain places, but like at the time, just putting out, an important record out in your career and not celebrating it in that live way was pretty like, oh, I guess we're not going to do that. And, when
Yeah.
my festival rolled around that next year and you weren't there, people were like, oh, I thought Hayden would be here. You know what I mean? And I was like, I tried, man. Uh, but like, yeah, I think it must have something to do with it. But now I'm interested very quickly about you. Here's one comment and one question. It's so funny to hear the PR people being like, "Hey man, you can't go off the road. Like, you can't do this." Like, because I remember being like, "This is so useful to me." Because I'm still trying to figure this out, and I was doing probably the best I was doing around that period. 2015 to 17, I think, was when like Debacle was probably chugging along the best in terms of media. I kind of had some pop. Obviously, you were a part of that. Um, and even then, I was just like, this is incredible. Like, if every artist was like this, and partnering with the label this hard and then also just going nuts, like it would be life changing. And then, as you said, it's probably not sustainable, but like, there is a part of me that's like, man, don't take that steam engine and just put it, say you can't do anything with it. Figure out how to partner. And I'm wondering if over these last few records, as with Mexican Summer and having a lot more support around you, have you figured out a way to combine that skill set and that more official sort of structured press? Are you finding a way to get value from that?
Well, I mean, I can fully say that having a good publicist works really well. I mean, I've seen the results of that of like, wow, you're able to get way more stuff than I would ever be able to get. And I've really enjoyed it. It's been awesome. But I think redirecting my energy has been, if I'm not going to reach out to writers conceptualizing a story, it's going to be, you know, approaching the narrative of the record or the imagery or the way it's pitched. Because I mean, with Mexican Summer, I'm on every meeting about the record, and that includes sales meetings, production, layout, artwork, mastering, all that stuff. I'm still heavily involved, probably to a fault where I'm bothering them. But I mean, I remember the first time I met all of the people at Mexican Summer in 2021. We all went out to dinner, and I remember talking to the GM Warren at Mexican Summer, and I was like, how many records do I need to sell to pay off the debt of the record? And I think he was kind of surprised that you're like directly asking this like right when we start. And I was like, I want to know how that works. I want to know how,
Yeah.
like, I want to sell records, and I want to know the numbers and how my record is doing. And so I think it's like now I just had an interest in the back end of how a label works. And even now co-producing this album by this guy, James Cross, for Woodsis, I co-produced that album. Like, I helped, figure out artwork. I wrote the liner notes. I'm the one that, pitched it around to get it on labels. And I did reach out to writers on this one too. So I think it's an extension of my old self now, is working with other artists who maybe don't have might not have as big of a reach as I do now. And I kind of like the idea of, if I can help, people, I like their music, if I can help them, it's just another outlet for me to kind of express that in a way that I'm not as able to do anymore with my own music, which I'd like to say I'm glad that I don't have to do that anymore, because it's cool that I don't have to send 350 emails out. Because back then, people people would say I was really lucky with press, but I think they didn't understand that I was sending out 400 emails.
Yeah, I mean, you were
Uh,
grinding like
yeah,
incredibly
and a lot of
hard.
those
Yeah,
emails were ignored. A lot of people
yeah,
ignored me.
yeah. Of course, absolutely. And that's the thing is, we talk about a lot about like you hit on two things. One is just that like artists need to, I think, really getting into that idea of the way you're talking about is conceptualize who they are and what they are, so that they can then go out and communicate what they are and who they are with each release, or whenever they want to communicate outwards. I think that would help artists do the thing that thing that we're talking about there, which is the um just the going out and representing your own music, which is like pulling teeth for most artists. You know, it is very, very hard. And a lot of people go, well, that's the PR person or um, the label's job. And it's like, yeah, we'll do it. We're going to do it, but nobody will do it as good as you will. You know what I mean? And it's a partnership. And I think that's a great way to say, um, to verbalize your approach for one. And you also are hitting on something that we've talked about a little bit on this newsletter about, like, is the right model right now? I almost sat there going, Hayden, are you going to start a label? But because you're kind of talking like you would want to. But a thing that we talk a lot about is the right model going forward. If I was starting today, I'd probably just want to manage people more than you know, and create a newer kind of concept where it doesn't really matter if my forward-facing name is on anything, but I have a very small group of people that I'm really partnered with in making and coming up with new ideas and being very creative with them owning their own stuff and sort of figuring out a model that is more sustainable in this world that is very complex, especially if they were new artists. You know what I mean? Um, but it sounds like on some level that's kind of what you're doing with this new record. You know, you're taking all those skills you've developed and you're sort of kind of almost getting into that model. Not saying you officially are doing that, but you're kind of somewhere in that range.
Yeah, I think I'm getting there for sure. I mean, I'm definitely interested in it and always will be. And I'm not entirely sure, at every point, um, I've never been entirely sure what it is I'm doing, but I
Right.
think it's just pursuing things I'm excited about. And I feel like if you do that, you can get some good results. And think about what you just said about running a label. I think that's, a common problem is a lot of people, especially in the past, I remember, expected a label to get them press. And we're talking about small tape labels. And it's like, this like fully, but it's incredibly hard running a small label. And we're just talking about the day-to-day production stuff, like finding music to put out, working out how to put it out, what format, like paying money to get records pressed. And you do all of this work. And if the artist at the end is just like, I'm disappointed in the response to it, it can be kind of a slap in the face of just like, I took a chance on your music and I believe in it. I'm sorry there's not press for this thing. But in a lot of ways, it's on the artist, like you said, to go tell their story because they'll do it the best. And, like your gift might not be, as a label, your gift might not be PR, knowing how to do that. Your thing can be, I know what music I like and I put out good records. But I think that's what causes a lot of smaller labels to fold is the expectations of everything they are expected to do, which are kind of absurd, you know?
Yeah, and I've been starting to think about it and talk about it here as this, growing a garden instead of this whole like buying a lottery ticket. Oh, it didn't show, 2 weeks after release that this one didn't win, so whatever. And I even, I spend a lot of time in that mindset. But like to me, a lot of what I do is get us all ready for the race. I do a lot of logistics to get us ready for the race, and then we get to the starting line, and we're gonna go run together out the gates, or the starting line or whatever. Torture the metaphor. And the other guy's like, "All right, I'll see you at the finish line. I hope you figure it out." And I'm like, "Oh, I thought we were doing this together." You know what I mean? Like, and it's this. I feel like we're like both need to be working on this record well before it's out, both in a press way and a conceptualization, all that sort of thing, getting ready for this thing, and then we go, and then it should have a long half life. We should be talking about the records for a long time, and I really want to break that press cycle. I mean, sometimes a perfect press cycle. I think you're probably in your best press cycle you've ever been in right now. I would guess like you're sort of hitting some high highs right now, and I think sometimes that works and is great and amazing, right? Like you are set up in a really great way. But like for most labels, like you're saying, like tiny labels, I'm printing 100 copies of things at this point, because things just keep shrinking. And like the idea that like, hey, I am putting stuff out into the PR world. It's not like I'm going to stop doing that, but like the thought that in the current climate, that's going to be able to move much of a needle. You know what I mean? Even if we did get pressed, that's the other thing is all the time. I don't know about your experience, but when you do get pressed, most of the time, it's validating and very cool. but you don't
Yeah.
sell more records that week. You know what I mean? You don't sell appreciably more records that week. So
It
it's
depends though. I mean, I can definitely say like I've had some press that I thought would sell records that didn't, and then some press that I didn't think would sell records that did sell a lot of records.
that's super
Um,
interesting.
I
Do you feel
mean,
like you understand why after the fact?
yeah. I mean, this is like a very recent one, but it's
Hmm.
like I feel weird bringing this up, but just so people, I don't know, it's the truth. But the most recent Pitchfork review for my record, I had no clue what that was going to be. All I knew is that Pitchfork was going to review it because a writer had grabbed it pretty quickly after it was announced. It was the earliest I've ever known there was going to be a review for the record. And the night it went up, I refreshed Pitchfork and add best new music. And I had no clue that was going to happen. And I was shocked. I was like so stoked about that. And it sold a lot of records. So
Yeah.
I can't say that best new music on Pitchfork still sells a lot of records. And that was pretty cool because you feel like you think like, does that sell records? And in that case, that actually did sell a lot of records. But a weird one that's kind of funny is my manager was looking at like my Bandcamp data recently, and
Hmm.
he was like, "Did you know that like Rate Your Music is your number two seller of vinyl?" I was like, Rate Your Music is?" He was like, "Yeah, that's like number two." I was like, "That's so strange that that's like the source." I think more records sold from Rate Your Music than my Linktree link on Instagram did. I was like,
Yeah.
that's so strange because I'm not, I don't control Rate Your Music. That's not anything I have anything to do with. So I mean, it's uh it's always changing. It's a moving target that you never know what will sell records.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, Rate Your Music has a weird amount of like background radiation traffic. I feel like for everybody, it's an interest. Maybe it's because it's an old school type of music nerd uses Rate Your Music, and also that there's probably already some intent if they're there looking at you. You know, like you've already kind of hooked. You know, a lot of times
Well,
people are
young
doing it while
kids are
they're.
on Rate Your Music. That's a weird
Are
thing
they
people don't
really?
realize. Rate Your Music has exploded with like the Gen Z demographic of like, if you go look at, a rapper like Young Lean,
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you go look at his Rate Your Music, there's a huge amount of traction going on there. Like young people use Rate Your Music now. Because I think they like the idea of curation. It does have that
Hmm.
Tumblr, early MySpace kind of use of you can
Yeah, it
have like
does.
a digital garden of records. And it's not a perfect website, but I will say I love that Rate Your Music is an outlet for young people to get into like digital collections. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
the way people rate on there can be kind of weird, but I mean, I've seen it with a band like Chat Pile. I think they got a lot of traction through Rate Your Music. And talking with their bass player, Stin Chat Pile, he told me that before they got Pitchfork Best New Music, Needle Drop, all of that stuff, I think their rise happened because of Rate Your Music. They were an unknown Oklahoma City band that they're all like most of them are in their early 40s, and Chat Pile, and they had been in bands all of their most of their lives. They had played in local bands, and then this band took off. And Chappelle was actually a band created centered around a movie night at one of their houses. It was just like a goof off band. And he joked with me one time something kind of like, of course, the band you make with like the least amount of intention is the one that gets the most intention, is like when they stopped trying. Um, and that to me is totally reassuring. It should be reassuring for people that a band in their early 40s can just make an EP. It gets a ton of traction on Rate Your Music, and then the press catches on to it after people on Rate Your Music did.
Yeah. And it goes back to your basic thing of like, you just have to be, it's like that Steve Martin quote, which is like, to how do you make it in Hollywood? It's like, first be undeniably good. You know, and there is some baseline thing of like, yeah, every good record is not going to do well, but you have this baseline thing of you actually have to be good. And that's a story that I wish was more common because those guys are getting better and better as they get older. The idea that getting older, yeah, you have less time for things or all this stuff, but like you would think that that story would be a pretty common story. But that record, by the way, I heard an early version and like, my God, or early preview. Uh, wow, that record's incredible. I'm so excited about that. I don't know if everybody knows that you did a collaborative album. Uh, what, how'd that come about? Like, give a quick pitch on that.
Yeah, so the Chat Pile collab album, that actually comes out this year, won't be long.
Yeah.
That record, that's another funny story, is literally last year, the day me and my wife Hannah were moving to Oklahoma City, we were leaving Amarillo, loaded up the U-Haul, drove the U-Haul to OKC, and we got out of the car, and the very first DM I sent was to the Chat Pile Instagram, just saying, "Hey, I just moved to Oklahoma City, would love to hang." And then we, the bass player, Austin, responded to me, and we ended up hanging out, hung out a few times, and then the idea of a collaborative album was brought up, and then we made a record. So, I mean, again, it was just a DM on Instagram that I reached out to them. I didn't
Still
know them at all.
happening.
Yep,
Still
it's still
happening.
happening.
Well, that's awesome, man. I think that's a great place to leave this. Do you have anything else you want to talk about? I think we kind of hit it all.
No, I think if I were to end, I would just say massive thanks to you, because I mean, you did take a chance on me when I was a weird homeschooled 18-year-old kid in Amarillo, Texas, who had a wild idea for an album. And I think people like you are not shouted out enough or thanked for your work, because I mean, your work is what enabled me to build and create new things, but I needed your help to make that happen. So I just, I'd like to say thanks to you. Huge thanks to you for changing my life and giving me a platform at a time when probably not many people would. So thank you.
That's I'm bad at taking that like type of compliment, but I really appreciate it. It's a very nice compliment.
It's the
Um,
truth.
yeah, and I mean, I think we did that very much together as a partnership too. Like it helped me too. Like I said, that period was really good, really fruitful. And I think people noticing that record, and you being really good at getting noticed, jumped me forward too. So it was a really good collaboration. I really appreciate it. I think people should go check it out. I know you have all your artist brain about it, but like people should definitely go check it out, listen to it again. I think that track with Danny Paul Grody is one of my favorite things either one of you have ever done. It just it it's not the most it's not about being impressive or anything like that. It just it's so good. It's so warming, and it's so great that I still get to talk to you, and I know Danny, and I put out, re-release something like this many years later. It was a really cool record to work on, and it's really great that that we're still chatting, and yeah, people should go check it out. So uh
Agree.
awesome. And you're all this other stuff you got going on. Great live album recently. The whole Motor trilogy is great. The new thing that you produced and the Chat Pile record coming out. Like just man, you're just still grinding. Yeah. All right, man. Thanks again.
Yeah, good to talk with you.
All right. That was again a wonderful conversation. I'm so happy to be 10 years on and still having a relationship with him and that record. I think it makes sense to play that record. He has the masters back for that record, but I don't think he'd be upset if we played something. I'm going to play Stray um, by him and Danny Paul Grody. It was the first time I was able to work with Danny. I think it's a great little perfect song. It's beautiful. I know Hayden's very hard on himself, but it's a beautiful little record. If you have not heard it, it's really worth going back and looking at. And it's crazy to see the list of artists he got to work with. It's just nuts. Uh, it was really great to connect, and I'm really proud of him, and I'm really proud of that record and all the things he's done since. The new record's really great. I think it's got a certifiable like crossover banger on it on that first track. Yeah. Um, as always, take care of yourself, take care of others, be kind, and I will see you next week.